She's an award-winning YouTuber and best-selling author obsessed with helping you go after the life you want.
I like it.
Join her as she seeks out the stories and strategies.
Give me every little detail.
Of extraordinary people who found success.
I'm going to get emotional. Oh my God.
Welcome to Detail Therapy with Amy Landino.
There are opportunities you have that you can just start to add to what you do. And I have taken jobs that people don't want. The expectations are low. Back to that lack of confidence thing. It's like, what do I got to lose? Yeah. Yet they're the most creative jobs I've ever had.
Hey there, welcome to Detail Therapy. You just heard a snippet from my chat with Beth Comstock, a change maker and author who built her career from storyteller to chief marketer to GE vice chair. I cannot wait for you to hear about this woman's career. In this episode, you'll hear Beth talk about how to develop your own imagination, what she did to bet on herself when the rest of the world thought she was crazy, and her advice for you if you're trying to make a tough and potentially controversial decision in your life. We have a lot to get into with Beth today, but for those of you who do not know, my name is Amy Landino, and I will be the host of this show. I'm a YouTube creator, professional speaker, best-selling author, and entrepreneur. I'm here to help you go after the life you want. You can find out more details about me by visiting youtube.com/AMYTV. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this episode. I feel like Beth and I were long lost friends. You'll be able to tell by the energy in our chat, but just such great value. I feel like we're aligned on a lot of things and a lot of interesting things that I never would have put together if not for reading her book, Imagine It Forward, and for speaking with her. So definitely going to get into that in just a little bit. I do want to give you a quick reminder, though, as I told you last time, I definitely need to know more about you. Every show needs to continue to get better, more customized, more special for you. And so the only way I can do that is if I know a couple more details about you. So if you could do me a favor, I need like a 2-minute favor for you to go to amylandino.com/detail therapy survey. That's amylandino.com/detail therapy survey. Have you ever noticed that I don't say like backslash or forward slash? It's because I honestly forget every single time. You know what I mean by the slash, right? Also, the link is in the show notes, so you don't need to know any of that. If you could just stop by that link, give me a couple details about yourself if you have not already. For those of you who have made the time, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just trying to get a few more of these in before I stop bugging you. So I promise, if you do this, the sooner you do, the sooner I shut up. And then I don't have to do it for like another year or something. We'll see how it goes. But I definitely need to hear about you, a lot more about you, because I can't measure things on a podcast the same way I can on YouTube. So I just need to make sure I know who I'm talking to. I have a feeling, but you get my point. You know what time it is. Got to give a quick shout out to a reviewer of the show. Shout out to Guka Aoi for their 5-star review of this podcast. So awesome. Thank you. Guka said, Amy is so natural and has such an amazing positive attitude and curiosity. I love it. She always gets me pumped and always reminds me to live the life I want, which we all could use reminding of. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Guka Aoi, and for your really fun username on iTunes. Your 5-star review means the world. Your words mean the world. This is something I read out loud, not to sort of tout the amazing things people are saying, but to basically let you know that I read these things so that I make sure I'm on the right track, much like a lot of other things I talk about. So thank you so, so much if you've made a time to review the show. And if you haven't yet, there's a chance you could get shouted out in this little segment. So pop into your reviewer of the podcast player. And no matter how many stars or what your review is, I need to hear it. So thank you for your time for that. Always remember what we talk about will be in the show notes at our show notes website. That is detailspodcast.com. Anytime you're like, what was that thing that somebody said? And where's the link to that? Or how do I find that? Or what was that called? Detailspodcast.com. Go to the episodes page, look for the face of the person, or if you don't know what their face looks like, then just look for the name because it's in the title. And if you hear something that, like today, if Beth Comstock recommends a book or recommends a strategy or recommends something else that you need to find the link to, it will all be in the show notes. We get into the details always. So go check those out. With that, let's get into my chat with my next guest. Today, I am sitting down with Beth Comstock. Beth is a change maker on a mission to understand what's next and help people and organizations do the same. She's built a career from storyteller to chief marketer to GE vice chair. As president of integrated media at NBC Universal, Beth oversaw TV ad revenue and new digital efforts, including the early development of Hulu.com. As well as many other things, Beth is a director at Nike and a trustee at the National Geographic Society, and she's also written a book called Imagine It Forward, which talks about building creative courage. You will hear in this chat, I loved it, and I absolutely believe you will too. Beth and I sat down at the VaynerMedia offices in New York City, so let's pop over there and take a listen to what she believes will help you go after the life you want. Beth Comstock, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Tell me, why do you navigate change?
I navigate change, not always well, but I navigate change because I just love learning what's new and what's next. I'm an explorer, but it doesn't mean I like change. And I think it's important to say that up front. I wrote a book about navigating change, but it doesn't mean I like change, especially the change I don't control, which is a lot of change.
Yeah. That is so good that you said that, because so many people hate change.
Yeah.
And the people that come out and they say, I'm a change agent.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you want to put a wall up to those people.
Yeah, I know.
That's so important.
I call myself a change maker because, frankly, words kind of fail us. Really, I like to understand change, find it early, see it so that I'm not surprised by it. Yeah. But it's a very different thing from making change, or I only usher in change. I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
It is. It absolutely is. You've had a really interesting career. I've been reading your book, Imagine It Forward.
Thank you.
And really good. I was telling you before we started recording, I just want to say, and I don't mean this to hurt the feelings of the authors I've been reading lately, but I've just been a little bored reading lately. I just feel like I hear a lot of the same things and a lot of things being repeated. And I know that we all go through experiences in our own ways and we learn a lot of the same lessons. But it was great to pick up your book, not just because I think you've done quite a bit really interesting in traditional media in your career, but so many relatable messages that I think not just I can learn from, but someone who's listening can learn from as well.
Well, thank you for that.
Absolutely. And so you've worked for so many huge names. I mean, in traditional media, in PR, you've done a lot with CNN, CBS, NBC. I think I read that you were at NBC when MSNBC was created.
Exactly.
You were part of sort of like that group. And then moving on to a massive corporation like GE. And in one of it seems like the big themes in the book and the themes of what you have sort of like talked about in your career is how important imagination is. Talk to me about imagination as a skill.
Yeah.
That it sounds like that was the resonating thing that not just in your career but in your life was really important. I don't know if a lot of people think about imagination as a skill set.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, and how has that shown up?
Yeah, to me, I mean, imagination is about creative problem solving. There's a part of creativity, but it's for a purpose. I think sometimes we get scared of imagination because it can run away with us.
Yeah.
Two, a lack of it means I don't have a better idea, and it puts a lot of pressure on you. But at heart, I think people are afraid of their creativity. And so I feel like what I saw in the course of business is our organizations are designed to squeeze the imagination out of us. We want data, ever more data. We want predictability. Yet what we need are creative problem solvers. And we don't train people. We don't expose people to that. And I think everybody can train themselves to be a bit more imaginative, to kind of grab agency and say, I'm going to think of a different scenario. I'm going to think through a different future.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think you even talked about sort of like the change in just industries over the years. There's probably a huge generation of people who didn't even have to think about having an imagination because whatever their job was very structured, just show up from 9 to 5 and do these things. And so the ability to even think, oh, I have an imagination, I can use my imagination, has been taken away from
the industrial age, now the machine age. I mean, we're all about just reliability, predictability. This is a staggering statistic. 75% of people who work in advanced markets like ours feel they're not creatively fulfilled at work. That's sobering.
That's insane.
Right? I mean, that's sad. It's because we think work is drudgery and repeatability, yet today, we're disrupted. It's a fast-paced world. We're encountering all kinds of new challenges we don't know the answer to. how are we going to solve that if not be more creative, more imaginative? If robots take over our job, all we're left with is our imagination.
Right. Right. Okay. So what I read in the book, just kind of going back to your very sort of beginnings, your imagination as a young child, maybe, was thinking, oh, I want to be a reporter when I grow up, somebody on air. What inspired you to even think like that?
Well, it's actually funny you asked that. I found something I wrote when I was 14 recently.
Really?
And I loved finding this. It was an autobiography. Trust me, I had nothing interesting to write about at 14. But I had this one passage, and I wrote, I am ambitious. I want to be 50 different things when I grow up. I loved finding that.
Oh gosh, it's so reassuring.
I know,
too, right?
And I've always been that, and so I love that ambition part. That at 14 I said that, and then I went on to list the things I wanted to be. I think like one was a lawyer. That must have been for an hour.
Sure.
I wanted to climb mountains. I mean, I had all kinds of crazy things, but ultimately, as I went off to college to go to medical school, but really what I wanted to do was tell stories, and that kind of led me to pursue a career in journalism. So I think story, as I put my story together and as I've thought about it, story is one of those threads. Imagination, storytelling, it's a thread that kind of weaves through my life.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things that I read in sort of your backstory is that you clearly delivered this memo to your dad at some point. Your dad is a dentist.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, my daughter wants to be a journalist. We're going to make this happen. And one of his clients, he'd hounded enough. He's like, oh, you're in media, get my daughter an internship or let her shadow somebody. Yeah. And you ended up following around Diane Sawyer for 2 hours.
I know. It was amazing. And this was Diane Sawyer the Diane Sawyer she came to be. She had just gotten back from Chad. I remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, she has no memory of it, I'm sure. But my dad, because he knew I had this passion for it, and he had this one connection. I mean, we grew up in a small town, distant, remote town, like close to Washington, D.C., but not really.
So cool.
And so he got this guy, like probably had his back molar and like a real grip and
really
like, you will find a way for my daughter to do something. And the guy like, okay. But it was amazing. I mean, I always appreciated the fact that she took the time to let a young college student shadow her. And she gave me all kinds of great tips that even today I remember. That evening my brother was graduating from high school. And I remember her saying, okay, so now you're going to be a reporter tonight. You're not at your brother's graduation. What's he doing? What are the other people doing? Where's your brother going from here? What did he accomplish? Anyway, I still remember that.
Yeah.
And so I always appreciated the fact that people like that took their time and it made it seem so accessible. So from then on, I was like, yeah, that's what I want to be. I want to be Diane Sawyer. I want to tell stories the way she tells stories.
Yeah. So what other tips do you remember? That's a great one. That's like that first, okay, don't just think about what's happening right now. Think about everything around it. Think about what's going to happen after this, or what kind of story are you going to tell from this?
Well, she was also teaching me, I think, like have perspective. Don't be sitting there like that's my brother and this is how I feel. Try to disassociate yourself from that a bit, which I thought was a really good lesson.
Oh, yeah, that's good too.
Soon thereafter, I got a internship when I was in college working at a public radio station in Norfolk, Virginia. And I had another great mentor. And I remember her gave me a audio recording, like a tape recorder, a microphone like this. And she said, okay, just go find stories. That was her, go find stories. And I remember I went home to where my parents lived. They lived near an apple orchard, and it was apple picking season, and migrant workers were always brought in to take these apples. Like, go find my story. So I go traipsing through the orchard, these apple pickers, and I'm just like, hi. And they're singing these beautiful songs that like help them pass the time of day. And I just stood there and I recorded their songs and I asked them, what are you singing? Why do you do that? So again, I remember that so vividly. I've actually looked for that video, that audio. I wanted to hear that. Like in my memory, it was so beautiful. I don't know if it was, but in my memory, it was so beautiful. Find the story, it's there.
Well, maybe it was so beautiful just because it caused you to think of a question, right? Something we talk a lot about Aftermark with our staff and the people that we work with is just having genuine curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
That has a lot to do with this whole thing, right? Storytelling, imagination, and just wanting to know, like, what's the next thing?
Exactly. And as you're saying that, I mean, here I was in this apple orchard near where my parents lived. I had passed by it millions of times. I had seen people do it, but I had never led with my curiosity and asked, one, I didn't know they sang. And then I asked them, what are you singing? Why are you singing? What, so I love the way it is. I mean, if you're curious, it leads you to tell good stories.
Yeah. One of the sort of big, I think, speed bumps in your life, not just in your career, but in your life, was this realization at some point that you and your husband were coming apart.
Yep.
And how old was Katie, your daughter, at
My
this
daughter,
time?
she was young, very young. I mean, baby stage.
Yeah. So kind of a crazy situation to be going. What's going through your mind at that point in time when everything's working out pretty nicely? You know, you're going toward this career. You thought, yeah, this sounds like one of those 50 things that I probably was going to think I was doing when I was 14. But this perfect life, everything's been set up wonderfully for me. It just doesn't feel right. And I have to make a change now.
Yeah.
How scary was that?
It was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And that's why I opened my book with it. I mean, you know, no one starts a business book with a personal divorce story, but I felt I had to for a couple of reasons. We're talking about story. Here I was in this situation. My career was just starting to take root. I had just become a new mother. I had a marriage that was good, but it wasn't really what we thought it was going to be. And I just had this moment of, wow, I'm leading this life that everybody else expected of me, but it's not what I expect to be doing. I want to do something else. I have ambition. I want to go places. And I just realized it wasn't working. And so accepting the failure at mid-20s and then saying, I got to go forward and I got to make it work. I'm choosing to go this path, pick up my daughter, we're going to go. Was the scariest thing I've ever done. And, you know, many years later, I look back and advising myself, I would have been, don't do that. But it was a defining moment for me. I had no choice but to make it work. And I use that because in times of change, we're all like, how can I ever navigate this? I find it really helpful to go back to those moments. We've all had those moments where you had to take hold of some kind of change, either make it or react to it. And you figured it out. And so to me, it's like, I can do that. I can do that.
I just found this piece to be so important because I think anytime I talk to somebody or I'm thinking about a big moment, a big shift in my life, it was because I realized something and it wasn't a matter of if, it was when.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of how are you going to carry yourself. And those were the moments that it's just insane, your ability to make a decision. I think you talk about how important decisiveness is. But from this story specifically, one of my favorite passages from the book was what you wrote here. Up to that moment, I'd lived my life more or less by someone else's narrative. A simple story with defined roles that led to a simple happy ending. Elegant without complications. But with every day that passed, I realized just how large the gap was between the story I was expected to follow and the life I actually wanted to live. That was just so big to me because so many people I know who are listening to this and people I talk to in moments in my own life where we know what the right thing for us is, and it's still so much harder to choose that and the life that you want versus the thing that everyone else is cool with. Even something as simple, divorce was huge for you.
Huge.
But something as simple as when you decided you were going to leave CBS to go back to NBC, and that was just seen as this ridiculous decision because they were in the pits.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we get a lot of noise. We get a lot of well-meaning people saying, "Don't do that." And you know, I think of the divorce, and my parents were devastated. And they're worried about me, especially worried about their granddaughter. They mean well, right? But they're not me.
Right.
And so I had to face into that moment of they're not me, and it's that moment of just pure raw confidence of I'm betting on me. There have been many times since then I didn't bet on me. I lost that confidence, but that was a moment of pure raw bet on myself. I'm going to make this work.
And the times that you didn't bet on yourself, is there regret?
Regret, but maybe learning. I mean, you fail, you don't go forward. It's that I raised by great parents in a small town. I had every reason.
Who you want to make proud of you.
Yeah, and I had every reason to be confident going forward. But there are moments, I don't know if it's society, us, we let other people into our heads too often, where you doubt yourself. So that moment, I was going back to NBC from CBS, going from the first network to the worst network at the time. People were like, career suicide. This is so stupid. Why would you do that? I can't explain it. I just felt I have to be part of this. And it was one of my most defining roles in a job ever. To this day, one of my best jobs, because it unlocked my entrepreneurial spirit. We were in the pits. We had nothing to lose. We had nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
It's not like I saw that, but it was just, again, I think you take a chance on something and you go, I got to make this work. I'm gonna open myself up. In some ways, I open myself up a bit more than trying to be very rigid and there's a set of rules. So I think in those cases, maybe that's the learning out of that. And in the where I lack confidence and where I've maybe failed or those, it's because I didn't trust that gut. I let other voices in my head, and you gotta listen to yourself.
Something just occurred to me, but before I get to that, what would be your biggest piece of advice for somebody who just heard you talk about that and is in the middle of a decision, or maybe they don't realize they're on the edge of it because they're trying to ignore it, between doing what everyone else told them is the right thing for them to do and doing what they actually feel is right, and that a lot of people will not approve on until they get on the bandwagon later when you are successful. Yeah. What would you say to that person that's making that decision right now?
Well, I think you have to listen to people's input. I think I do listen to it. And then you have to decide, I think foremost, what's your strategy? What's your goal? Why do you want to make this change? Are you clear? Is it because you want to make it, or is it because people are telling you you should? Is it a realistic goal? I mean, I don't know. I'd like to, I don't know. I'd like to, I don't really want to fly to the moon, but let's just say I wanted to fly to the moon. But I have no skills to do that, right? I would like to be a Grammy Award-winning singer, but I don't have a voice. So really, is that going to happen? So there has to be a realistic set of goals of what you're going to accomplish. And then you just have to take the feedback and say, is this relevant to me? If it is, I need to think about it. Do I still believe it? So there's a lot of self-interrogating, a lot of what if this doesn't go well? What will I do? What's the worst that can happen if this doesn't happen? So there's some kind of negative scenarios I think you have to play out. I have a really simple process. It works for me. When I have to make a big decision like that, I write things down. I do pros, cons, and then I elaborate, and I factor in some of that feedback. Well, my mom says this, so-and-so says that. Okay, here's my mission. I kind of put that at the top, the vision of what I want to do. What's the worst that could happen? The best? How good can it be? How bad can it be? I obsess over it. And then I go, enough. Enough obsessing, because if you obsess forever, you never get action.
That's right.
Enough. I look at it before I go to sleep. I kind of have a little mini ritual where I sort of tuck the paper away. I go to sleep, and then I say to myself, when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to have a decision. I wake up, and I go, what's it going to be? And then I go, okay, decision made, that's it. Don't go look at the paper. Don't call them back up and go, really? Decision made. And then I have to make it work. It may not be successful, but I have to be comfortable that I listened and I did my best, and that's it.
I love that, because that's such a great roadmap for what otherwise we kind of read in the book as, just be decisive. That's the most important thing. You don't have to be right all the time. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be successful. But if you're decisive, you're wasting less time. That was just a great, just sort of like play-by-play of what you can do to figure it out.
And I use this. I shared in the book a story of not going to work at Apple, not taking a job offer from Steve Jobs before he became the Steve Jobs. But I used that same method then. And did I regret from time to time that I didn't go take the job? Sure. I mean, especially when the stock was on its rocket high, But again, back to that, did I have a good strategy? Did I understand why it wasn't the right thing for me to do? Yes. And was I going to make a path, at least committed to the path I chose? You can't go back.
Right.
Was I going to call him 10 years later and go, that stock's really good. I'd like to come back. I was a bad, no, you're not. You don't get those do-overs often.
It's an elaborate way of just doing a gut check.
Yeah, it is. And we don't.
You knew that wasn't going to be right.
I knew it wasn't. But everybody, you're like, what, are you crazy? Are you, even putting it today, are you crazy? I've had people, you should have taken the job. You're crazy. Okay, but I didn't. What are you going to do about it?
It's the realization I had earlier was from a phrase that you talk about in the book called job crafting, and sort of just, I was thinking about it on this very micro level. Like, take the job that nobody else will do, because the expectations will be so low that you have some flexibility to kind of like figure out what more you can do and get creative. But it almost sounds like you were doing that on a larger scale from the sense of the job at NBC, which everybody thought was crazy, and their expectations were probably low, but just hoping for the best at that point. How much do you think job crafting people don't think about? They get too fancy about what they should have because they graduated, or they should have because they worked for somebody in particular.
Yeah, Amy, I think it's such a good question. I love this notion of job crafting. Some researchers came up with it, but I think it's so true. I mean, I feel like that is what I learned about a career. Within every job you have, there are things that you want to do that you just have to add to your job responsibilities. It brings out your passion. I mean, I'm not saying go crazy and grab someone else's job, but there are opportunities you have that you can just start to add to what you do. And I have taken jobs that people don't want. The expectations are low. Back to that lack of confidence thing. It's like, what do I got to lose?
Yeah.
Yet they're the most creative jobs I've ever had. And so I think if you approach it that way, here's the mindset that often people go like, they'll never go for that. I just had this conversation with somebody this week. I was like, we were brainstorming. Maybe you think about this. She goes, oh, he'll never go for that. Talking about her manager. He'll never go for that.
I say that way too much. My husband will tell you. He'll tell you. I say it all the time.
Well, we all do.
They'll never go for that.
We all do. And did you ask him? Well, I know. And it's almost like they want to come back and say, see, I told you. But it's like, did you ask him? No. Or I did. Like, okay, well, is there another way you might have think? Is there another way into it? So I think this idea of just adding certain parts of your job, I'll give you a really good example. A woman I love who did this. I worked with her. She was a PR person, but she loved design. And so she started using design elements in the communication work she did, like visualizations and graphics. And over time, she redesigned press releases so they were visually rich and it was fewer words and people could see things. And she really ushered in the team I worked with, a whole visualization practice that was amazing. She did it. No one asked her to do it. Before you know it, she created a whole department that she led. It was something she wanted to do. It was something we needed. We didn't really know what we needed. If she had had a big elaborate plan, everyone would have been, how much is that going to cost? She showed us. So, I like future. I like trends. People like me, I think one thing we could do is start maybe just doing a little email for our colleagues. Hey, here's 3 trends I saw this month that I'm really intrigued about. Just do it every week. I mean, you start to be seen, hey, she's somebody who follows future trends, right? No one asked me for that.
Right.
So those are some of the things I think you can do to kind of, what I love about job crafting, the researchers talk about it as a way to combine your interests so that you're getting some joy in work.
Yeah.
And I think I'd add, but it also has to be something that the company or the organization will get value out of too.
Benefit from. Yeah. And it's do instead of just say you want to do or say that it's a part of your job or just say like I'm trying to do this. Actually just do it and see what the reception is and pivot and go as you continue. I love that.
And often what happens in organizations, you see what other people are doing or everybody's like bragging about a certain role. It's seen as the plum role and so you overlook maybe the role you have. But they need to see some initiative from you. They need to see some creativity. And maybe that's your path to getting that next assignment when they're like, look, she took that horrible job and look what she made of it.
Love that.
Right? So you never know.
And there's so much confidence that comes from doing that.
It does.
And I like how much you got so real in this book about shyness and just not always being super confident. You were very decisive, but I think just not being 100% sure all the time was something you thought about, but you tried not to let on. But you talk about something in the book called social courage. Can you talk about why that was important when you realized like, oh, this is what I need, social courage, this will help me a lot in terms of balancing how I feel with how I want to present myself?
Yeah, I just, as a person, I've always been reserved, shy, awkward, and I'm also introverted, and they're different. I mean, introversion is associated with both of those things, and I realized I was holding myself back. One, I just wasn't comfortable putting myself out there. Boy, times have changed, but at the time, and I just saw I was missing opportunities. I share in the book a story. I worked at Turner Broadcasting. I worked for Ted Turner, and I did his PR when he came to New York, and he came a lot. And I remember once I worked for him for a year, and I was at this event, and I was like, I've worked for him, and he does not know my name. And I was like, that's so sad.
It's the worst feeling.
And whose fault is that? Okay, maybe he doesn't remember, but and so it was so awkward. He goes into the men's room, and I'm like, okay, now's my chance, as one does. was, right? So awkward.
As someone goes into the men's room, I think about that all the time.
And so I'm waiting there, and he comes out, and I'm like, Ted, and it was so awkward. He looked at me like, what are you doing? And I lost my nerve. He walked away, but I was so proud of myself because I did it. Mm-hmm. I gave myself a challenge. I put myself out there. He never knew my name. Today he wouldn't know my name, but I did it. And so I think that's some of if shyness holds you back, if introversion holds you back, I was the quiet one.
Yeah.
People didn't know I had a voice sometimes. Yeah. Whose fault was that? Not theirs. Maybe they could have asked me a question, which I try to do now with introverted colleagues, but some of that was mine to get over.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think being a shy or an introverted person means I'm quiet and in a good way. I don't hog up the room talking, except for now. I'm a good synthesizer. So I think there are some good things you have to recognize about that too.
Yeah. I just love how you talked about this because I think this is the thing I haven't been able to articulate. The perception as a YouTuber and a podcaster here is, oh, you must be extroverted. Because you're not just because you're doing a lot of talking, but you're talking to people, you're interested, you're doing all these things, you must be extroverted. And I've been constantly trying to combat that and say, no, I curl up in the fetal position when I'm done working.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's almost
I
like
just
people
like to
think
go
you're
home.
lying, right?
Right. I'm not because genuinely that's how I feel about who I am. But if I was trying to articulate what I have the ability to do with a lot of practice, and that was just for you with Ted Turner, a great example of practicing that couldn't get worse than that. You went up to somebody who walked out of a men's room and didn't pan out, but you did come out of your shell, you tried, you introduced yourself.
And you have to be a little light on yourself too.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're saying, what I think is a good thing you're pointing out, it takes a lot of energy to kind of put yourself out there. Doesn't mean you can't do it.
Right.
It just takes this energy out of you, and your natural state is just not to do it.
Yes, especially for the introvert.
Yeah.
We exert so much more energy, but it doesn't mean you can't.
Right.
You're just going to have to, it's your energy bank account.
Right.
Where are you going to spend? Where are you going to save back up? And so I think social courage was that phrase that I was like, you know what? That's a really good way of saying what I've done. I've figured out how to collect social courage in the moments I need to, like right now, and then later when I don't need it, I can chill, relax, and then when I need it
because you have to
again.
connect with people if you want to make your way in the world,
right?
And it takes a bit of courage. I found that courage came before confidence, and what you're doing at those small moments, like you said, you're putting it out there. I'm going to meet Ted Turner. I'm just putting a little courage in my pocket so I can pull it. And over time, you're doing the confidence, right? So, like you and I, you're just pulling a little bit out. It's not like it's not like run into the building and snatch the granny in the burning building courage, right? It's courage.
And in the same token, which is what I've said, which is why I love how you're phrasing that. It's as you go along and you do things and you do just one more thing. You tried to introduce yourself to Ted, and then maybe you had a more successful moment with somebody else after that. Every time you do, you're collecting a little bit to put in your pocket.
Exactly.
You're picking up this confidence and this courage along the way.
You have to. And you got to silence that voice, because that's the other thing. I think it's not just an introvert thing, but we all second guess ourselves. And so, that little courage is kind of shutting that voice up too. Because what happens when you and I meet, and two introverts we'd stand there for like 5 minutes. Like one, we'd find each other, which would be a miracle, right? And then we go like, how are you? Good, how are you? I'm good, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Meanwhile, in our heads, we're each going like, Amy's going, why did Beth wear red? And you're thinking, I'm going like, why is she wearing her watch? Meanwhile, neither of us are thinking that. We're both in our heads.
We're both trying to survive it.
We're not listening to the other. So part of what you're trying to do is just silence that and go, I want to know about Amy. Like, what's up with Amy? Like, not just how are you?
Yeah.
What's interesting to you, Amy? What have you seen lately that surprised you? What's your story? That takes confidence, but really it takes courage.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could talk to you all day about sort of your career, because there's so much, but I think you break down this imagination thing, this creativity thing that maybe some of us feel like we have very naturally, and others feel like they don't. You break down the process, I think, of discovering that in yourself really well and imagine it forward. So I highly recommend everybody pick up the book. But now I kind of want to get into the details, what life is like now, and maybe some things that you've done throughout your life and career that have helped you get to what you've been able to accomplish in your life. And so I'd love to hear, do you have a typical morning routine? Is there something that kind of gets you on the right page every day?
Yeah, I'm one of those those obnoxious people that wakes up really early.
Okay, me too.
So I'm
What
up
time?
at 5 a.m.
Nice.
And I like to. I have a beauty ritual I do first thing, and then I like to write. I didn't do this until the book, but I've now got a habit of I write, just download my brain, 3 pages.
Love that. Morning pages.
Morning pages.
Yeah,
I'm a total subscriber to that. Love it.
Me too.
It's from the Artist Way with Julia Cameron. I love that. And then I catch up on some work, and then I usually have a cup of tea when I'm doing
Quiet
my pages.
time. No one's bothering you.
Exactly. And then I have breakfast, and then I kind of get going on my day.
That's awesome. What's your workout regimen like?
I would love to tell you it needs to be better. I was really killer for a while, but with the book I've laxed. But I am pretty good about yoga once a week. I do some sort of core, and I walk everywhere. I live in New York City.
I was going to say, like, a lot of this has to be from being in New York. Because every time I'm here, my steps are just...
I will walk anywhere. I love walking. So I try to stay really active. I used to do kickboxing, but honestly, I've gone now. I think I've mellowed out. So yoga is more my speed.
When it comes to sort of like the use of your phone, I think that there's like this huge debate that like notifications, too many notifications, too much time on your phone. Do you find you're spending a lot of time on the phone because it's work related, and or are you the type of person that just picks up the phone when somebody is calling you, or are you more rigid in terms of, no, this is the time I've outlined for this other thing, so it's time to like
I'm easily
ignore.
distracted, and so my phone is not my friend in that. I've been really working on that. I've been really trying to put my phone away, put my devices away. I'm better, but it's still a problem.
Do you ever do anything like calendar blocking, or how do you structure your day?
Yeah, I do calendar blocking. Well, when I worked in a company, I felt like my calendar, I worked for my calendar, not it worked for me. So that was a real tension. But I've been religious about what I call make room for discovery. This idea, at least 10%. For me, it's even more of my time scheduled to explore new things, go see things. For example, last week, I carved out an hour to go to the Whitney and see the Andy Warhol exhibit. That's awesome. I went yesterday and saw a new store of Ben Kaufman, who I used to work with, who founded a new kids store in New York City. So I make time to go see these new concepts or new ideas. I feel like that is something I've had to really structure.
Yeah. That's cool. That's great, because you're making time for that creativity.
You have to.
I think Julia Cameron talks about that too, just going on like artist dates.
Yeah,
like,
I don't do that but I like the idea of it. I think it's a really good one. To me, my version is just make room for discovery. Just go see something new, or just walk a new way to work. When you're going through the
look around.
And look around when I'm in the airport. Can I grab a magazine that's very different from what I normally, again, that time that I would be going to the same websites I always go to, pick up something new, go see a new website, go follow someone new on Twitter, or go to get a new Instagram follower.
Where do you get most of your news? Speaking of social,
I have a real read a lot. I mean mostly social. I'm usually following links on social, especially Twitter, LinkedIn are especially good for news links. I have a high-low system. And I think it's high meaning like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and low meaning like the Daily Mail. And
I love that. Okay, good. More of the low. Okay.
Yeah, and New York Post. And I've always said that because I actually think it's important to see different perspectives. And frankly, like something like the Daily Mail, like they have really amazing human interest stories. Now, half of them I don't know if you should believe, but I love them.
That's very true. It's kind of funny because you can get great advice on storytelling from any one of those places.
Exactly.
In their own ways. Speaking of reading, how about books? Are you a big
I
reader
love
of
books.
What are some
books.
maybe 1 or 2 recommendations that you have for somebody who's maybe going through some self-discovery in their career?
I guess it depends on the self-discovery. One of my favorite books that's on personal development is Twyla Tharp's Creative Habit. So back to what we were talking earlier, are you creative or imaginative? She's a choreographer, and you'd think like, I'm not a dancer, but really good. In fact, I was inspired for my book in some of the practices I put in there. So that one I'd highly recommend. Awesome. of how to be disciplined in how you think about creativity. This sounds hokey, but I love some of those old classics classics like How to Win Friends and Influence
No,
People
that's a
from the
good one.
50s, Dale Carnegie. I think it was the 50s or something.
Yeah.
It's just kind of corn-pone, all
Yeah,
American
but it's so tried
advice.
and true no matter what the state of things and technology, it still works. It's all the same principles.
I love fiction. I have a habit of reading a classic fiction and then a contemporary fiction. So one of my favorite stories I read this year I hadn't read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I think with all that's happening in technology today, it just reminded you the importance of humanity and what we were saying earlier, the unintended consequences of some of the technology in the world. So I think those things also inspire you to be more creative.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I had a question from the audience being my husband, before we started talking. And now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, just before we're wrapping up here, I do think it might be a little bit important to ask. You've had quite an amazing career over the last, I don't know how many years, but 30 years. What have you seen in your time that might be better or worse for women in the state of work where you started and today? Because I'm sure that starting out, that factored into some of the shyness.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't help, but I guess I'd say I expected things 30 years later to be much better. They're better, but I expected them to be much better. When I started, these are the kind of, and this is the environment, just to give you a sense. I remember I was a junior journalist and covering Virginia state politics, and he had a meeting in the governor's office, and I introduced myself, and somebody's like, and I want to take Beth out, I'm going to take you out on a date when we're done, in front of the whole group, and like that was so cute. Once I got dumped with really a lecherous old producer and that my colleagues had set up, and they were like, he's going to drive you home, stuff like that, that wouldn't happen today. I mean, maybe it still does, but but I didn't, I wish I'd been stronger. Like, you can't say that. I'm not going to ride home with that guy. Yeah. Things like that I think I in hindsight, I could have had more confidence. I'd hope today, because of all the issues and messaging, people feel more confident to say, like, no, that's not cool. I'm not going to do that. But also, I think at the heart of it is people want to hire and work with people like themselves. Don't do that. We need difference. I know the women I've worked with, we've worked harder. We don't take things for granted because we've had to work like crazy to get there. We're really good once you hire us. Like, we don't take it for granted. So hire more of us. Hire more people of color. Hire more people with different mindsets, because generally we've had to work harder to get there, and we're not going to take it for granted.
I love that. Before I'll ask my last question, I want everybody to follow along, because you said you're on the Twitter and the Instagram. Yep. So where can we find you in addition to your website or anything like that?
Yeah, Twitter, it's at Beth Comstock. LinkedIn, same. Instagram, same. Cool. So all those, and I'm really trying to do better on Instagram. So if anyone would give me feedback on more they'd like
I'll give you all my tips.
That would be good. Yeah, and I, of course, have great tips from you. So thank you.
Awesome. Okay, and make sure you pick up Imagine It Forward, and highly recommend. I just finished, and it was just a great read. So thanks,
Amy.
much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Great talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great with you as well. And just one more question. What does it mean to you to go after the life that you want?
Well, I think first you have to know, what is the life I want, that I want? Back to where we started, what's the story you want your life to be? And then I think from there, it gives you a bit of rocket fuel to say, I'm going to go after that. But really interrogate yourself. Is that the life I want, or is it the life someone else wants me to have? So I'd say start with that question.
Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you.
All right, let's do a detailed recap. First of all, when you're trying to make a decision, I love Beth's process here. Listen to input. Maybe you don't want to, but it's probably a good idea. Just take it in consideration. But when you are, know what your goal and your strategy is. Are you just shooting from the hip, or is this something you really care about? The input matters because you need to make sure you look at all of the angles. When you're doing this, try a pros and cons list, kind of like Ross from Friends, but hopefully this will be for your eyes only. Am I right? Listen. Write it down, pros and cons, but then go to sleep with the affirmation, I will have a decision when I wake up. And when you have that decision, and hopefully you'll just go with your gut based on what your analysis says, you'll do it, you'll make it happen. Another great tip was to embrace job crafting. Everybody wants to be able to walk into the dream situation. I've known people in the past who got their dream degree and got their dream job when they left school immediately, and they still screwed it up. Think about the fact that you could be fancy or you could do the work. Walk into a situation where they don't think you're going to do much or they don't expect much of you and blow their minds. Next, I love the idea of building social courage. This is so important. Everybody thinks that I'm this extrovert, that I'm crazy and excited all the time, and I love being around people. And it's not that I don't love being around people. It's just that it's something that exerts more energy from me because I am an introvert. So in social situations, what have you done with your energy bank account to prep yourself for that situation? Build up your social courage and stop fighting who you actually are. Make the adjustments so that you can lean into who you are and be the best version of yourself whenever you can. Remove "they'll never go for that" from your vocabulary. Okay, Amy, remove it. Take chances. Stop assuming somebody's not going to be okay with your idea or they're not going to listen. If you do the work, if you present something that's a solution instead of a complaint, if you do something about it, somebody might just be interested in what you have to say. And a quick tangible tip here, the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. After I recorded this interview, which was in December, I decided that our team at Aftermark should read it as their first book of the year. So not only do I recommend this because I have also read it, and darn it, I don't care if you read the first version of this ever and you're reading about a time when there was no computer. It's fine. You need to understand that all of these people skills work across the board from start to finish, no matter what year it is. All the principles are so important. So as we are at Aftermark, pick up How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a killer read, and it just is a great reminder of how human we are. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. If you want to discover even more actionable tips, head over to AMYTV by typing the URL in your browser, youtube.com/AMYTV, or search in your YouTube app for Amy Landino. Subscribe for good vibes, kiss the ones you love, and remember, go after the life that you want. Cheers.